Here are the most dangerous myths about talent that keep you stuck. We're going to start with the one that screws over more people than any other belief in human performance. When you look at someone crushing it in their field and decide they were just born that way. See, there's this story we tell ourselves about exceptional performers. We watch someone dominate their craft, and our brain immediately writes a nice, clean narrative. They had it from the start. They were gifted. They were blessed with something I don't have. And that story feels so right that we never question it, but it's doing something brutal to you. It's solving the wrong equation entirely. You're diagnosing a talent problem when you actually have a transformation problem, and working harder on the wrong diagnosis just confirms the error rather than fixes it. Let me show you what I mean. December 1771, Salzburg, Austria. A guy named Leopold Mozart is staring at his 3-year-old son Wolfgang, and he's got a plan. Not a hope, not a wish, a plan. See, everyone knows the story of Mozart as this magical child who sat down at a piano and just knew what to do. This gift from the heavens who composed masterpieces while other kids were still learning to write their names. But that's not what happened. What actually happened is Leopold took his toddler and subjected him to one of the most intense, specialized training regimens ever documented. We're talking hours every single day, deliberate practice, immediate feedback, constant refinement. By the time Wolfgang was 6, he'd already accumulated more focused practice time than most amateur musicians achieve in a lifetime. His father constructed his genius. He didn't witness it emerge from nowhere. Mozart's talent wasn't the input, it was the output, the receipt, not the gift. But here's why that story got flipped. It's way more interesting to say a kid was touched by God than to say his dad ran a brutal training camp for years. One story sells, the other story is just work. And we do this everywhere. We look at Michael Jordan and forget. He got cut from his high school basketball team. That cut wasn't proof he lacked talent. It was the trigger for a transformation sequence. He didn't have a ceiling, he had a method problem. And the second he found a better method, the ceiling evaporated. We look at London taxi drivers and think they're just good at navigation. But researchers scanned their brains and found something wild. Their hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for spatial memory, was physically larger than normal people. And it wasn't large before they became cabbies. It grew. After years of navigating the city, their brains transformed structurally. That's not talent. That's transformation leaving a permanent mark on biology. So why do we keep chasing the talent story even when it screws us over? Because transformation is uncomfortable, and talent is a way better excuse. If someone's great because they were born that way, then you're off the hook. You don't have to face the thing that actually builds greatness, which is deliberate discomfort. Identity reconstruction and method refinement. Let me break down what that actually looks like. First, deliberate discomfort. There's this guy named Laszlo Polgar who decided to run an experiment. He believed genius was made, not born. So he raised 3 daughters with one goal: turn them into chess grandmasters. People thought he was insane. But here's what happened. All 3 daughters became world-class players. One of them, Judith, became the strongest female chess player in history. But the key wasn't that they played a lot of chess. It's that they practiced in a very specific way. They didn't play the same games over and over. They isolated the hardest positions, the ones that made them uncomfortable, and lived in that discomfort until it became easy. Then they found new discomfort. That's deliberate practice. You find the thing that's just beyond your current ability and you stay there until your brain adapts. Recent research calls this the 4% rule. Optimal improvement happens when you push exactly 4% beyond your current skill level. That's the sweet spot. Too easy and you're not triggering adaptation. Too hard and you're just flailing. But right at that edge, something happens in your brain. When you make mistakes at the boundary of your ability, your brain releases chemicals that command it to adapt. It wraps your nerve fibers in a substance called myelin, which is basically insulation for your neural pathways. The more myelin you build, the faster and more accurate your signals become, up to 10 times faster. That's not talent. That's your brain physically transforming in response to specific stress. And here's the thing that messes people up. Elite training sessions are ugly. They're filled with mistakes. Because high-level performers operate at the edge of their ability on purpose, they're forcing adaptation. Meanwhile, average performers practice in their comfort zone, where everything feels smooth. And then they wonder why they're not improving. You're not improving because you're not uncomfortable. You're running naive practice. Playing the same song 1,000 times is naive practice. Isolating the 3 hardest notes and drilling them for an hour until they're perfect, that's deliberate practice. One builds myelin, the other just kills time. Now, second part of the transformation sequence, identity reconstruction. There's a difference between saying, I want to be good at this, and saying, I am someone who does this. When you adopt an identity, your actions follow automatically. You don't need willpower. If you see yourself as a runner, you run. If you see yourself as someone who wants to run, you have to convince yourself every single time. Elite performers don't rely on motivation. They reconstruct their identity and let behavior follow. But here's where it gets interesting. That identity shift doesn't happen because you think about it. It happens because you do the work first. Action creates identity, not the other way around. You do the thing badly, then okay, then well, and somewhere in that process, your brain rewrites the story of who you are. And once that story changes, the old ceiling disappears. Third, method refinement. This is the one people miss entirely. You hit a plateau and you think you've hit your talent limit, but what you've actually hit is a method limit. You're trying to improve by doing more of the same thing, and the same thing stopped working. The people who break through plateaus don't work harder. They work different. They find a new angle, a new drill, a new way of chunking the skill. Let me give you an example. Miyamoto Musashi, one of the greatest swordsmen in Japanese history, was challenged by Sasaki Kojiro, another legendary fighter. Kojiro was known for this insane technique with a 3-foot-long blade, unbeatable reach. Musashi didn't train harder. He changed his method. He showed up to the duel 3 hours late, dirty, and instead of a sword, he carved a wooden oar from the boat he arrived on. He made it 2 inches longer than Kojiro's blade. 1 strike to the skull. Fight over. Musashi didn't have more talent. He had better method refinement. He identified the variable that mattered, reach, and he solved for it. That's what transformation looks like. You find the constraint and you rebuild your approach around it. Now, here's the brutal part. Society doesn't want you to believe this, because if greatness is transformation, then it's available to anyone willing to do the work, and that's a scary idea. It's way easier to say some people are just born with it. That way, we don't have to admit that the gap between average and exceptional is just a gap in method, not biology. We don't have to face the fact that most people quit right before the breakthrough. There's this thing called the plateau of latent potential. You put in massive effort and see no results for a long time. It feels like you're stuck, like you've hit your ceiling. But what's actually happening is your brain is storing the work. It's building structure in the background. And then one day, suddenly, all that stored work manifests at once. You didn't get lucky. You didn't suddenly find your work. Talent. You just finally cashed in the transformation you'd been building. But most people quit during the plateau because they think effort should equal immediate results. It doesn't. Transformation has a delay. And if you don't know that, you'll bail right before it pays off. Let me hit you with another one. Child prodigies. We love prodigy stories because they seem to prove talent is real. But here's what actually happens to most prodigies. They fail as adults. Why? Because they relied on initial ease instead of engaging in the struggle required for high-level transformation. When things got hard, they didn't have the tools to push through because they never had to build those tools early on. Meanwhile, the kid who struggled early, who had to develop deliberate practice habits and method refinement because nothing came easy, that kid builds the engine for lifelong growth. Talent is a narrative error. It's the story we invent to explain performance because the reality, which is grueling, unglamorous work, doesn't make for a good movie. But the science is clear. Every single study on peak performance traces exceptional output back to transformation sequences, not birth gifts. The brain is plastic. It adapts. You can grow new neurons. You can thicken your myelin. You can expand your hippocampus. You can change your bone density and muscle attachment points through specific demands. Your body and brain are transformation machines. They will become whatever you consistently ask them to become. So why do you keep chasing talent even when it feels wrong? Because you've been sold a story that protects you from discomfort, and that story is expensive. It costs you the thing you actually want, which is growth. The second you stop asking, "Do I have the talent for this?" and start asking, "What transformation sequence do I need to run?" everything changes. You stop looking for proof you're gifted and start building the methods that make giftedness irrelevant. You stop comparing your starting point to someone else's highlight reel and start focusing on whether you're 4% better than you were last month. You stop waiting for the ceiling to appear and start smashing through method limits one at a time. Greatness isn't born from talent, it's built through transformation. And the only question that matters is whether you're willing to run the sequence or keep telling yourself the story.